Hello everyone. I didn't actually intend to do a GT710 video, but things change. This is the GT710 from ASUS with GDDR5 and 2 gig of VRAM. It's not very exciting card, I'll give you that. But these are still being sold as gaming machines, and I wish people would stop. Luckily, after all this time, we're finally getting a replacement to this card in the GT1010, which is basically a cut down version of the GT1030, much like this was a cut down version of GT730. So that's good news. Hopefully we'll see the end of this card in particular. But if you're using, let's say, Intel HD graphics, is this worth upgrading to? I mean, you can actually buy them at the moment. Not really worth the money, but if you're lacking in a graphics card and you need something a little better than what you got, dare I say this might be good enough. But let's go look at some benchmarks, see how it performs in a few games, and then you can make the decision yourself. Let's start off with some 3D marketing, shall we? Here I'm running just a few tests. In Time Spy we score 259, which is terrible. Fire Strike 927. In Night Raid we score 4217. And finally in Wildlife we score 1940. So overall pretty poor HD graphics type of area. In Passmark we score 895. And then let's have a look at some benchmarks. Here's Final Fantasy 15 running at 1080p on light. As you can see, it is single digits and it's absolutely terrible. Knocking it down to 720p, no improvement whatsoever. So dropping the resolution down hasn't helped. It's still running at single digits and is just terrible to watch. Well, how about Final Fantasy 14? This game is obviously much older. Here you can see we're getting only in the teens, but this is when there's a lot of stuff going on. This is the most intense part of the actual benchmark. CPU is fine here in this particular instance, but overall we scored 2659, which is pretty poor. This says it's playable. I don't think it really is. In Strange Brigade, we are on low again in 1080p. As you can see, single digits. Knocking down to 720p, once again, still pretty awful. This game is unplayable on this particular card. Now let's look at something like Doom Eternal. This is on low at 1080p, as you would expect. Absolutely single digits, completely and utterly unplayable. So this shows the games that this card cannot run whatsoever. Looking at something like Apex Legends, this at 1080p, as you can see, double digits just about, averaging about what, 15, 16, pretty awful. But if we knock it down to, let's say, 720p, we should get something a little better, you'd think. But as you will see here, the performance is absolutely terrible. It's about the same really, no real change, maybe a few frames here and there, but it's not great. So unplayable on the GT710, no matter what resolution you've set. Now Fortnite, this is one of the things that these cheap gaming machines are sold to play, and I'm quite impressed. Running on low at 40% internal resolution with the GT710. This game is playable. You're getting an average of 69 FPS, which is quite impressive, and I'm actually quite surprised it runs this well, because last time I ran this particular card in this game, it was awful. So they've obviously done some optimization since I last checked. So that's good news. Now another type of live service online game, you got Road Company. This is on low. We're getting the average about 39 FPS at 1080p, which is okay. You want probably 60 FPS solid for a game like this. So at 720p, if we knock it down to that, we get much better performance. We're getting, as you can see, MSI out has been chopped off a bit, but the average is about 73 FPS, which is considerably better. So it's always above 100. You get the occasional dip a little bit when it's loading in, but overall, during the game, solid 60 FPS experience if you have VSync on. Now, let's look at some non-online FPS stuff. This is Hitman. This is the second level. as you can see, it's just awful. We're getting barely 10 FPS. Granted, this is kind of a busy level, but that is unplayable. And this is at 720p as well. So games like Hitman, granted it's kind of an old game, is unplayable on the GT 710.
Welcome, sir. Enjoy the show.
How about Alien Isolation? This is a much older game, and this is at 720p as well. As you can see, it's struggling a little bit. Everything's on low. We're getting an average of around about 53 FPS, which isn't great. Certainly playable for a game like this. I mean, it gets a little fast here and there, but there's a lot of sneaking, and it should be more than playable on this card at 720p.
Do you really want to take that chance?
Okay. We find her, kill her.
This way. She was down there.
Now let's go even older. This is Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. This is 1080p with most of the settings turned off or on low. We're getting an average around 70 FPS, so more than playable. Knock the resolution down a bit, you should be able to put all the settings up to full. Very fun game if you haven't played it. All the Splinter Cells are pretty good apart from the newer ones. So if you've got an older card like this, you can certainly have some fun with a game like Splinter Cell. Controls are a bit weird, once you get used to them it's all fun. Of course, let's look at Half-Life 2. This is 1080p at maximum settings, so just slightly newer than Splinter Cell. I think it's about the same time they came out. And as you can see here, we're getting a solid 100 FPS at times, above 60, average of 94. So more than playable on this card. So if you haven't played Half-Life 2, I suppose not many people have not played it these days. But you can certainly play it on a GT 710, which goes to show that the games like this run just fine. So Portal 2, and stuff like that should be fine. I doubt Counter-Strike Go will be any good, but you can certainly give it a go. Now let's look at some simpler looking games. This is I Am Setsuna. Running at 1080p, there are no settings in this game in particular. As you can see here, it's struggling. We're getting around 52 FPS average, which isn't great, but for a game like this, it's more than playable. If you play this on the console, it was about 30 FPS locked, so it's better than that. Just not 60 FPS locked all the time. In certain areas like the world map, you get 60 FPS, but in towns where there's a bit more going on, it does struggle. But how about 2D games like Darkest Dungeon? Well, as you can see here, it is 60 FPS, pretty much locked. And we're only using about half of the graphics card. So 2D games, perfectly fine. So no issues here whatsoever with a game like this. And if you haven't played Darkest Dungeon, it's a very good, if hard, game at times. But it's very entertaining. And the final game we'll look at is a new game that came out recently, The Lion Song. It was free, well it's currently free on Epic Store if you're watching this as this video is released. Playing through it seems quite interesting. And once again, the GPU is only running about 17%, so 2D point and click indie style games work just fine. So you've got many games you can play on this card. You just have to watch out for more modern 3D intense stuff. And this card does struggle to run 1080p for whatever reason. It is worth noting that its PCI Express bandwidth is kind of low. It's around about, well, it's technically 8x running at 4x. That is just what the card is. But overall, the card does work. Is it better than Intel HD graphics? Well, yes and no. If you've got a modern CPU, I mean very modern, the HD graphics or UHD will be better. But if you're using, let's say, Ivy Bridge, Sandy Bridge, Haswell, anything in that era, even Skylake, this will outperform it, just because you can have more VRAM. Because normally on those generations you're limited to 1 gig VRAM max, which isn't really enough. So this card has 2, not designed for gaming, but as you can see, it can game. Well, anyway, thank you for watching. I'm going to do another video on a GT 1030, because that is a better card than this, and if you can see one of those, you'll probably pick one of those instead. But watch out for that video, and I'll do a comparison with this card, and until then, see you in the next one. So any comments below, leave them, but for now, goodbye.